Candyman is directed by Nia DaCosta and is a follow-up to the original 1992 horror film. Yahya Abdul-Mateen stars as Anthony McCoy, a visual artist living in Chicago with his art gallery director girlfriend, Brianna Cartwright, played by Tiona Paris. Trying to rejuvenate his career, he wanders around the Cabrini Green projects, also the setting for the first film, for inspiration, and comes across the urban legend of Candyman. Becoming obsessed with the legend, he goes on a dark, bloody path of self-discovery as he learns of his deeper, personal connection with Candyman. As I discussed in a previous video, I've been skeptical of the reboot-remake trend in movies these days. So the question I asked myself was, does it carry the Candyman mythology forward? Does it work as a horror film? I remember how the original film captivated me with its raw, haunting portrayal of inner city life, showing the poverty and race lines dividing the haves and the have-nots, and their deep ties to a cycle of historical trauma that continues today. Cabrini Green looms over the original film as an overwhelming, almost mythic presence, as much as Candyman himself, who actor Tony Todd immortalized as one of the great horror icons in movie history, alongside Dracula, Freddy Krueger, and Michael Myers. These two elements, Tony Todd and Cabrini Green, make up Candyman's DNA and are the key ingredients to its horror, which is profoundly rooted in America's own horror story, the horror of slavery and black victimization. Many horror films showcase the terrifying depths of human cruelty, like Hostel, Saw, or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But we can still maintain a level of detachment in the sense that this is only a movie. Because Candyman's horror is very real, it doesn't allow us to divorce art or myth from reality, since it is rooted in the racially inspired segregation and violence that continues to terrorize America to this day. While shooting on location in Cabrini Green, Tony Todd and Vanessa Madsen were accompanied by bodyguards in light of the project's crime-ridden reputation, a case of a production living the very fears captured in the movie. The new Candyman is more explicit in its social commentary than the original, and further explores the Candyman figure, who turns out to be not just one individual, and we find has appeared in a number of incarnations throughout history. I liked this idea of Candyman as a collective figure, which opens the door to exploring the effects of racist generational violence upon Black communities through the eyes of different individuals in different contexts. To be fair, the groundwork for this idea was already implicit in the original Candyman, since we learned that after Daniel Robitel was burned alive by the lynch mob, the ground upon which his ashes were spread became the foundation for Cabrini Green. Candyman was always a collective entity through his deep ties to place and history, manifesting the trauma transmitted from generation to generation. Director Nia DaCosta opens the film with a nice visual reference to the original film's opening overhead shot of the city, but inverts it with the camera looking at the skyscrapers from the ground up as they disappear into the gloomy, overcast sky. It's a striking angle, which establishes an oppressive, disorienting atmosphere. DaCosta uses a lot of wide, panning-out shots, where the city looms oppressively over its characters. One theme of the film is the cathartic expression of pain and suffering through art. Like the original Candyman, who had been a portrait painter, McCoy is also an artist, and both depict the pain of their shared history artistically through the enduring power of myth, becoming a myth themselves through the Candyman urban legend. However, myths are not immortal, also susceptible to the ebb and flow of time, only enduring so long as there is a cult of believers to give them power. In the 1992 film, because his myth had been discredited, Candyman has to shed innocent blood, reenact his own victimization in a sense, to maintain the power of his legend over the residents of Cabrini Green. As we learn, McCoy is the baby that Candyman intended to sacrifice in a ritual bonfire, imitating Candyman's own death by fire, but who was saved by Lyle, who sacrificed herself in McCoy's place. By the end of McCoy's journey in the new film, we find his body is a scarred and twisted mess due to a bee sting. He looks like a burn victim, and he ultimately fulfills Candyman's intended role for him as a sacrifice in the first film. As we know, Candyman was covered in honey and stung to death by bees before his body was set on fire. Another thematic connection to the original film, the apparition of the bees, was a clear foreshadowing of McCoy's transformation into Candyman. Sparked by the Candyman legend, we can see McCoy's transformation as the culmination of his artistic vision. The film verges into areas of body horror as McCoy's scarred body becomes his new canvas, manifesting on his very flesh the historical trauma and rage depicted in his Say My Name art installation. Art has the power to sublimate suffering, give order, shape, and meaning to chaos, and, in this way, purge and cleanse pain through catharsis. It can also give visibility to the victims of history through the act of naming. Candyman is summoned through the power of his name, which instills both fear and desire. You have to say it willingly, but death is the price. Through his victims, Candyman is enacting the trauma of his own victimization, but he also wants his victims to experience his suffering, give meaning to it by spreading his legend, making his name known. DaCosta's film alters Candyman's role as a fear-inducing symbol of black pain at the end of the film. William Burke, a resident of Cabrini Green, abducts Brianna, McCoy's girlfriend, and brings her to McCoy, who is now in a dissociative state. Burke had told McCoy of the Candyman urban legend, which in the new film involves a hook-handed man called Sherman Fields. Fields was brutally beaten to death by the police after being falsely accused of killing a white girl with a razor blade concealed in a piece of candy. At the end of the film, Burke cuts off McCoy's bee-stung hand and replaces it with a hook. He plans McCoy's death by the police in order to change Candyman into a force of vengeance instead of a figure of black victimhood. After Brianna stabs Burke to death, the police arrive and gun down McCoy unprovoked. The police try to coerce Brianna into backing their false narrative that McCoy was killed in self-defense. Brianna then summons Candyman, who, taking the form of a resurrected McCoy, slays all the police officers. Bees swarm over McCoy's face, then fly off, revealing his transformed face as Tony Todd's Candyman, Daniel Robitaille. Candyman then says to Brianna, "Tell everyone." DaCosta intended the finale to feel like a catharsis. I liked how the film goes back to its roots with Daniel Robitaille's return, while also making a new beginning for Candyman as a symbol of black empowerment. In the first film, Helen Lyle's death elevates her into a white savior, overcoming the black bogeyman at the end. I appreciated how this film rewrites the legend by turning Candyman into a black savior, thus giving power back to the black community. However, my reaction was mixed, and I found the ending bittersweet in a way, since this newfound power is achieved at the cost of another instance of police brutality, further complicated by the fact that McCoy's death was staged by Burke. Injustice is righted at the end, but again by means of a cycle of trauma and victimization. I also found the new Candyman, Sherman Fields, noticeably lacking in presence. He doesn't speak at all, a stark contrast to Tony Todd, whose seductive voice haunted the original movie, giving the character a suave sensuality as well as more agency as the driving force behind the narrative. In contrast, Sherman Field's appearance with Candyman's hooked hand and royal coat seemed a little forced, and it made me wonder if the film would have worked better as its own thing without the Candyman mythology. As part of the new wave of black horror films, the new Candyman follows a similar formula as Get Out and its successors, with the film climaxing with the black characters fighting back against white oppression. There's also a commentary on gentrification as well as the appropriation and exploitation of black trauma. The film is very aware of its own potential for this kind of exploitation, and shies away from dwelling on the brutalization of its black characters, which mostly happens off-screen. Most of the white characters are made into racists, which are most convincingly portrayed in the thuggish police officers, greedy self-serving hipsters, and classist snobs looking to exploit black pain for gain. It does, however, lead to some lazy writing, particularly in the murder of a group of white girls in a bathroom. You know nothing about these characters, but when they start bullying a black girl, they are immediately turned into unsympathetic racists, so you don't care about them when Candyman kills them all. It's here that I wish the film embraced its horror elements more instead of slapping a social commentary on every scene. It's a trope that the victims in horror films are rarely likable or sympathetic. It makes their deaths easier to watch. But I would have liked it more if they had gone less hard on the social statement here, since these throwaway characters are included for no other reason than to enjoy their gory deaths. The new Candyman revitalizes the Candyman mythology and more deeply explores the racial themes of the first film, carrying the original story arc forward into a new generation, while also distinguishing itself from it. Apart from Tony Todd's all-too-brief return, the new Candyman or Candymen made little impression on me, which detracted a little from the film's mission statement to empower its victims, although it made up for it by Yahya Abdul-Mateen's strong performance as an activist artist transformed into a folkloric black savior. I liked how the idea of multiple Candymen opens the door to future installments. As far as potential franchises go, I was intrigued enough by this new entry to want to see where they take the story next. However, I felt Tony Todd's absence throughout the film. Like Brandon Lee's The Crow, others have stepped into the role, but none have captured the essence of the character as well. For me, Tony Todd will always be Candyman in my eyes.